I'm trapped. I can hear that thing lumbering through the hallway. My God, what the hell is it? I'm trying my best to keep quiet, but I can't help but whimper. The soft scratching of my pencil on this notepad sounds deafening in the quiet of this tiny closet. I'm almost certainly gonna die in this place. I just hope someone can find this. Maybe it will do some good, or maybe it already doesn't matter. I'm not sure how long I have until that wheezing thing finds me. Oh God, or that gray stuff might ooze under the door and dissolve me. Oh my God, what it did to Benny, Bill, Jonesy, and Donald. To all of them. Even if I don't survive, the world needs to be warned. Long story short, I was a cop, but I got shot in the head. The doctor said I was lucky, that it went straight through without hitting anything vital. However, I still needed 3 steel plates to hold my fragmented skull together. Also ended up with permanent tremors in my right hand from brain damage. So it's no surprise that my cop career didn't thrive. Just a year later, I was a retired 45-year-old cop living on scraps. After a few months, I started to get desperate for work. One evening at my pub, my friend Graham mentioned an acquaintance who was looking for employees for some private research institute in the Mojave Desert. What, are they still blowing up bombs out there? I scoffed, eyebrows arched with bemused incredulity. Graham stared down at his beer, not sure what the hell they do. But they pay super well, so who cares? He took a long sip of beer, foam clinging to his lips. I think it would be a good fit for you. Turns out this facility, and it really is known as the facility, was located in the middle of nowhere. When I looked it up online, I couldn't find any information. Later that week, I called the number that Graham had scrawled down for me on a beer-stained napkin. My right hand was useless to me if I wanted it to do anything that required fine motor function, so when I dialed the number on my phone, I had to use my left hand. The phone rang twice before a metallic feminine voice answered and said to hold for an operator. After a few seconds of muted elevator music, I spoke to a soft-voiced man who told me my skill set was perfect for their current vacancy, a security management position. He said if I filled out some forms, they would pay for me to fly on out for an interview in person. 1 month and several days later, I was employed again. By the time I started my new job, I realized I had no idea what research went on down here. During the interviews, my duties as a security manager had been discussed, but any mention of their actual research interests had been carefully avoided, redacted, or omitted. The security staff were also told to avoid fraternizing with anyone not from their own department, including security personnel from other sections of the facility. On my first day, I asked others about the nature of the facility's research, but no one had any interest. Just stick to your contract. No point in rocking the boat, my new boss, Bill, said to me curtly, so since then I've not discussed it with anyone else. If only I had, maybe I would have seen this coming. The section of the facility which I managed was Section B-15. This area, like most of the core facility, was located several hundred feet below the sun-scorched surface of the Mojave Desert and comprised many green-painted corridors peppered with tall, wide doors made from dark, stainless steel. The rooms inside were large and sterile. Artifacts were cleaned and studied in these rooms after they were brought from the excavation sites E1 through E27. Of course, whether we wanted to know the nature of the research or not, eventually, after patrolling some of the research labs for weeks, it wasn't difficult to figure out that the scientists were mostly archaeologists or paleontologists. I would often find objects of different sizes and shapes lying around in various states of cleanliness. Some looked like ancient amphoras or large stone bird baths. Others were less identifiable, a chipped statue, a melted lump of some unidentifiable metal, or large chunks of a glass-like material. I found this all extremely curious because, as far as I knew, the Mojave Desert didn't have much in the way of ancient architecture, at least of any ancient civilization that I know. As the months went by, I started to get friendly with the other guards, most of them ex-cops too, and we started playing cards and drinking Irish coffee in the evenings. My 2 main colleagues consisted of a jovial, short man with orange hair named Jonesy and a much older, much grumpier, and much balder man, Donald. They were good men, and we had a lot of laughs together. My stomach twists when I think about where they are now. Though I grew fonder of my fellow guards, I found myself developing a severe dislike for the white-coated researchers. Most of them were pernicious and arrogant. The only scientist my security buddies and me could stand was a scrawny man named Benny. Our favorite thing about Benny was that he never talked about his work. It was earlier today, at around 2400 when all the scientists were running from their rooms. They must have received some message a few minutes before, and we watched them from the surveillance monitors as they got all excited and leapt up. Their lab coats flapped and flowed around as they jumped to their feet and made for the main exit. Soon after this, the large red landline phone near my video surveillance desk began to ring. Expecting the call, I picked up the receiver before the first ring finished. "Hey boss, what's all the excitement about?" Bill's voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. "The diggers have found a friggin' huge object out here. The biggest thing they've ever dug up. It's really irregular. They want to bring it to B-15, and I need you to organize the logistics and security." My brow furrowed. "I guess it's too big for the main entrance. Maybe we could bring it in via the big doors of the auxiliary hangar." Bill grunted with agreement. "Yay, we'll have to improvise a bit, but should be manageable. I have no idea what it is. Well, you'll see for yourself. I'll get some of the boys from B-14 to help you out." And just well, he paused for a moment. "Just be careful." I grunted, my eyebrow arched from surprise. Why was he so afraid? Thanks, appreciate it. See you guys soon." Donald, Jonesy, and I had coffee in the office and called the guards at the hangar doors to arrange clearance. About an hour later, we were at the platform near the doors waiting for the cargo to arrive. The massive metal hangar doors had been opened, which was rare. What was more irregular was that nearly every staff member from sections B11 to B18 were all gathered together in a silent knot of people. Despite the silence, the air sizzled with anticipation as well as the searing heat. I stood transfixed from curiosity at the massive doorway, waiting in the shade of the hangar as the relentless sun beat down outside. In the distance, I saw a black speck grow larger against the bright blue sky. Slowly, it took the form of a helicopter, which was carrying a large rectangular-shaped mass below it. Within less than a minute, the helicopter made its cacophonous approach toward the hangar and gently lowered the object onto an enormous wooden scaffold. I barked orders and signed forms as the guards rushed about, making sure the other personnel stayed a safe distance away. The air was blaring with the sound of the helicopter blades, and sand rocketed into my face, forcing me to splutter. "All right, let's get this thing processed," I yelled over the sound of the helicopter as its engines powered down. My colleagues and I wiped dirt from our faces. Bill emerged swiftly from the chopper and shook my hand. We quickly reviewed the paperwork he gave me, and then he made his way back downstairs to his office in Section B1. He was keen to get away for some reason. "All right, it's officially in my care now. Show's over. Get the non-essential personnel out of here immediately and secure the object. I want to get Benny up here to analyze it ASAP." As my colleagues cleared away most of the staff and the excitement died down, I was finally able to take a moment to inspect the object. It had been lowered onto the wooden scaffold fitted with wheels just outside the hangar and had been pushed slowly into the center. The few aircraft in this hangar were all currently under repairs and were non-operational, therefore there was plenty of space. As soon as I saw the sheer size of the object, I knew it would be difficult to transport, but not impossible. The object was a wall, or a large fragment of a wall. It was about 20 feet long, 8 feet thick, and 10 feet high. At first the wall appeared made from some sort of boring gray stone. However, when I looked closer, the wall was alive. The wall's surface bubbled slightly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I stepped closer. When I was only a few inches away from it, I felt cold. A bead of sweat ran down my cheek, and I thought I heard something. It sounded like someone far away calling my name. I felt a strange pressure around my head. A sudden invasive thought wormed to life. "Throw yourself into the wall." I shuddered and held myself back despite the sudden strong desire. I heard the faint voice of Benny and crashed back to reality. My eyes snapped open, and I found my nose an inch away from the wall. It radiated cold like an open freezer, and it smelled like rotting clay. The surface of the wall simmered ever so slightly. It reminded me of the fizz of some gray effervescent medicine. I paled as I took a large step backward. What is this?" I turned to face Benny, who stood with another scientist. He glanced at her briefly before he approached the wall to apply more straps. He was careful to avoid touching the wall with his bare skin. "Honestly, we have no idea." I got Donald and Jonesy to help Benny transport the wall down to room 278B via the service elevator. Donald grumbled about how badly the wall smelled, and Jonesy had eyes as large as saucers when he saw it up close. It looked so unreal. Once downstairs, I returned to my office to get some more coffee and file away the paperwork. I tried to put the strangeness of the wall out of my mind, but it had truly unnerved me. I felt so tired, my forehead drenched with cold sweat. I had been working extra shifts lately, but I had never been hit by such exhaustion so rapidly. As I sat at my desk facing the surveillance monitors, I was unable to fight the sleep forcing my eyes shut. I've had many hangovers in my life, most of them unpleasant, but when I woke up at my desk, I'd never felt quite so singularly awful. My clothes were soaked with sweat, and my whole body felt exhausted. My arms felt like molasses as I attempted to move. My forehead throbbed, and I felt bruised. I also felt a pressure squeezing my head from all sides. It was quite peculiar. I sat back in my seat and rubbed my eyes. Then I froze. A hand was lying motionless on the floor just behind the table in the center of the office. I leapt to my feet and rushed forward. I gasped from horror as I saw Donald lying on the floor, his chest sliced to ribbons. Gallons of crimson red stained his blue uniform, and his eyes stared up empty and terrified. Pallid and shaking, I went to my office landline to call for backup immediately. As the receiver met my ear, my stomach dropped into my feet. The line was dead. The sole means of communication within the core facility is done through landlines. The landlines are monitored at all times, and any interruption results in an immediate response from security. We had many protocols and fail-safes to ensure communication remained enabled, but the line was dead, and there was no sign of any response. In fact, how long had I been asleep? What was happening? I rushed back to the monitors. I hadn't noticed it before, but I couldn't see anyone. The cameras were all operating normally, but not a single person could be seen. The corridors were just as green and bare as most late evenings. I looked at the clock. It was only 17h. I had slept for about 2.5 hours. Where were the janitors? My heart was hammering in my chest, and I couldn't catch my breath. Meanwhile, my head was throbbing and my eyes were burning. Suddenly, I heard an indistinct whisper. Gooseflesh bloomed all over my back and arms. I'd heard this voice before. I'd heard this voice from the wall. I turned to the monitors and searched for the wall. It had been brought back to the surface, the hangar. It sat upon the bare ground right by the massive doors. However, the doors were all sealed. The wall itself looked different. It was enormous, almost 3 times longer and taller and wider. Just then, I realized that the titanium blast doors had been sealed as well. My heart rate doubled as I noticed large dents, scorch marks, and scratches all over the doors. Someone had tried to break them down. The hangar floor was covered in blood and ash as well as abandoned weapons. My God, I even saw a rocket launcher lying blackened and fractured near the doors. What the hell had happened? I spun my head to look at the security control panel on the wall to my left. My heart, already blaring, felt like it leapt out of my mouth. My eyes grew wide as I realized someone, probably Donald, had activated a quarantine procedure. This meant that the entire facility would be sealed airtight. The only way to open any doors now was from the outside. My God, why had he done this? Where was everyone? Did he try to wake me? Did I really sleep through all this? I looked back at Donald, my heart still hammering from seeing his dead eyes stare into mine. I sighed sadly and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was currently 1831H. I returned to the monitors and began to rewind the security footage. Surveying the screens, I watched my past self enter the security office at around 18600H. By 18610H, I had passed out on my chair, drool dangling from my mouth. Okay, so let's see where the wall was at that time. Should be room 278B. I thought to myself aloud as I clicked on the button that would display the footage from that room as well as the surrounding corridors. The screen was black as the footage loaded, and I was about to hit the play button, but hesitated. Did I really want to see this? I closed my eyes and took a few slow breaths. I can't figure my way out of here if I don't know what's going on. I have to know. I hit play. The camera was located opposite the door, giving a full view of the room. At first, everything seemed normal. Benny and some other scientists had transported the wall into room 278B. It was 1623H when they were taking the straps off the wall. A loud popping sound was heard, and the researchers spun around. The lights in the room dimmed and flickered. Suddenly, something long and slimy exploded from the wall, curled around Benny, and pulled him in. He screamed in terror as he vanished, his cries immediately silenced. My jaw dropped open, and a small yell escaped me. Without realizing it, I was instantly on my feet, shaking my head in pure denial. My heart burst. What the hell was that? What the hell? What the hell? My head was full of static. I felt tears in my eyes as I watched guards and researchers rush into the room. The wall shimmered, its simmering surface began to boil and bubble, and it grew 3 feet higher. I saw it reshape itself so that intricately carved figures appeared on the wall's edge. I leant in closer and gasped. One of those figures looked just like Benny, his mouth stretched open wide into a permanent scream. I didn't want to continue watching, but I had to. The guards and researchers were horrified by what they saw before them. Suddenly, without warning, their body postures relaxed, their eyes grew glassy, and their arms fell slack at their sides. Those within the room moved as if sleepwalking. Some stayed still while others left the room. Brow furrowed from confusion and fear, my eyes swiveled to the footage of the corridor outside. The guards and researchers that had just exited 278B immediately began attacking and grappling those around them. I yelped as a vacant-eyed guard lazily shot another man in the leg. The thrall then dragged the wounded guard into room 278B. The mad guard held the wounded guard's leg fast as he casually walked into the gray wall, pulling the struggling man in behind him. During this altercation, I noticed Donald for the first time. He was hiding behind the corner of the corridor at the far end and was firing his gun at the madmen. He didn't manage to hit anyone, though. He then ran over to help a stray researcher to their feet, and then they both ran down the corridor and out of view. I can still hear the cries of pain and pleas for mercy as those who fell victim to the thralls were each dragged into that horrifying wall. With every person it swallowed, the wall wriggled and grew and grew. More and more ghastly decorations began to bloom on its surface, all of them made from the bones or likenesses of those who had been absorbed. The bigger it got, the stronger its psychic influence became, until it seemed to reach nearly everyone in the facility, turning them into thralls. I looked on in horror as one by one, all janitors, researchers, guards, diggers, admin staff, everyone gradually stopped what they were doing mid-conversation, their eyes emptying. The janitors dropped their mops and buckets. Researchers dropped precious materials and equipment without care, letting them smash to pieces. In unison, they all slowly, with vacant expressions, moved toward room 278B. Among the horde of thralls, I saw Bill and Jonesy, and so many others I knew by face. A guy who'd held the door for me once, a researcher who always slurped her coffee at lunch. Hundreds of people. What filled me with an unnameable dread was that I knew what was going to happen. I knew what was coming. I tried to shout at the monitors, "Stop, wait." I grabbed the monitors and shook them with frustration. The terror began to fill my stomach, deep and cold and aching. Suddenly, I noticed Donald reappear on the screen. He was trying to hold back the researcher he'd helped earlier, but it was useless. I saw Donald, chest heaving from effort, stare with incredulity as he sat defeated on the ground. Everyone else around him stumbled dreamily toward their doom, but Donald refused to give up. I saw him run from corridor to corridor, trying desperately to stop them. He threw chairs and tables in their way, but they simply pushed them aside or jumped over them. I saw him run toward this office. I saw him enter, saw myself slumped on my chair, still completely unconscious. I saw Donald try to shake me awake. He slapped me a few times and was yelling in frustration. He gave up with me eventually and ran over to activate the quarantine lockdown. I saw him tear down the hall back toward room 278B, pistol in hand. My best guess was that he saw what was happening in room 278B and decided he was going to stop it. However, as soon as he got close to the door, a long pale tendril burst through the door directly into Donald's chest. The tentacle had a hooked end and it slashed at him. I saw blood spurt out of him, saw him stumble and fall from the ground in fright. However, he still managed to get a hold of his gun and fired multiple shots at the tendril. It writhed and flailed. Donald took the opportunity to climb to his feet. He grimaced and clasped his chest as crimson leaked to the floor. He moved back down the corridor, much more slowly than before. Eventually, he got back to the office. He locked the door and then collapsed. I cried out in frustration. That whole time I was completely useless. My mind felt like static again for a few seconds. I couldn't work out what my next move should be. A thought hit me hard, one I should really have thought of before. Why had Donald and I not been psychically affected by the wall? Everyone had been enslaved. Everyone had been forced to walk into that wall. Why not Donald? And me? I knew it must be connected to my horrendous sleepiness. My eyes grew wide with sudden realization. Shit, the steel plates in my head. Donald had a single steel plate in his skull because of a rock climbing accident he had in his 20s. When I got close to the wall, had it sensed my resistance? Had it tried to incapacitate me? If so, it means this thing possesses sentience. While I pondered this, I noticed some thralls restrap the wall in room 278B. They transported it to the elevator and back up to the hangar. Once there, the thralls moved the wall off the scaffold onto the floor and began to beat heavily on the large metal doors with bare fists. Some even shot at the doors with their handguns. The ricochets killed a few of them, but not one single person seemed to even notice. Some of the guards even used a rocket launcher. I yelled with shock as they fired at deadly close range, lazily blowing themselves up, leaving the doors scorched. After this proved futile, the thralls all grew suddenly rigid. Next, they all formed a line in front of the wall, and one shambling step after another, all the remaining employees were assimilated. Even the dead and wounded were not spared. Those still alive carried the corpses of their fellow thralls into the wall. It was 11705H when the last employee disappeared forever into the gray horror, and the wall expanded to its current size. Without warning, a large writhing mass of twisted limbs emerged from the wall. I gasped from horror. I couldn't tell exactly what it was because the lighting in the hangar wasn't good enough, but it definitely wasn't human. Its silhouette was about 7 feet tall and thin and stretched. It had too many legs, and it didn't seem to have a head. This thing lumbered over to the doors and began to strike them with a strength and ferocity one would only find in a starving polar bear. I could tell that the doors were taking strain, and they began to bend, but even then, they would not yield. After about half an hour of smashing the door, the creature stopped and slowly shambled toward the stairs. My heart froze. It was coming here, or was it here already? My eyes swiveled back to the main monitor, and I was surprised to see Donald still alive. He was scratched and bleeding badly as he shakily pushed himself from the floor. He then looked up at the ammunitions cupboard and began to search through his keys. I saw him curse. He couldn't find the key with his trembling, bloodied fingers. In the next instant, his eyes bulged, and he heaved as if vomiting. His body doubled over, and long gray tendrils oozed from his mouth and wriggled furiously. He grabbed his throat and fell forward onto the floor. Frozen in horror, I watched as his body squirmed, and he wriggled as if his intestines were filled with snakes. I continued to watch, absolutely transfixed, as 3 long gray tendrils emerged again from between Donald's lips. Slowly, they wriggled free of his mouth. They were about half a foot long, dull gray, and thin like spaghetti. I watched as they slithered toward my unconscious form on the monitor. I bit my lip and stood up. Slowly, my brain put 2 and 2 together. Bile rose in my throat. I yelled at myself to wake up and see the worms. Just then my stomach dropped, and I could feel an itchiness in my belly. I could feel the wriggling itch of 1,000 gray eels in my gut. Or was I imagining it? My stomach writhed, and I was about to puke when I saw myself awake and stretch in my chair. The worms somehow realized I was awake, and they moved out of view towards the before I could watch the screen any longer. I heard a hiss, and something slimy and long wrapped itself around my throat so tight I couldn't breathe. I gasped with surprise and strained my neck to look at the monitor that showed the room in real time. I saw from the camera behind my head that something thin and gray had wrapped itself around my throat. I saw 2 more of those things coming at me from behind as well. They were about to come wriggling up my chair when I grimaced with anger and grabbed my gun from its holster. The thing around my neck was hissing and making awful clicking and guttural noises. Its small worm head had a mouth that bit, and it latched onto my neck to suck my blood. I pulled at the leech and pressed my gun up against it. I pulled the trigger. With an ear-splitting bang and a sound like a water balloon popping, the leech was reduced to sticky goo. I pulled the remnants of the leech off my neck and spun around just in time to shoot and kill the others. I grinned with a mad joy and yelled with relief. Immediately, a wave of nausea and exhaustion hit me, and I fell back onto my chair. What the hell was that? What the hell do I do now? I sat still for a moment and tried not to lose my mind completely. I swear I could hear Woody the Woodpecker laughing somewhere in the distance. I needed to keep it together. I took a long, deep breath and tried to think of a way out. Summarizing the details of my predicament, I realized I was trapped alone inside the facility with an otherworldly force. Also, even if I found a way out, I'd potentially be letting an evil into the world that could destroy all life. At once an old thought returned to me, one I'd often experienced as a cop. If I need to sacrifice myself to save others, I will do so without complaint. A wry smile spread over my face. Once a cop, always a cop. My smile vanished as I continued to think. But my God, if this thing gets out, if it gets into the minds of other people, if it gets larger and larger, could it swallow the world? The solar system. What other monstrosities would it unleash? I was talking aloud now. The sound of my voice gave a new reality to my situation that made me shudder. I turned back to the monitor. It seems I was all caught up with what had happened. I stared blankly into the screen while I watched my past self continue to wake and wince from pain. I switched the monitor off and saw my reflection in the blackness of the screen. I was pale and my eyes were wide and unblinking. What do I do now? I turned in my chair to look at Donald's body. Were all those worms gone? Could some still be hiding? And what should be done with his body? Probably best to have it burned. Poor Donald, he didn't deserve this, I muttered softly as I examined his corpse, making sure there were no unexplained twitches beneath his skin. My eyes moved from his body up to the ammunitions cupboard just above. Wait, why was he trying to get into the cupboard earlier? We don't have much. My eyes grew large with realization. Holy crap, he was trying to get the bomb. Me and Donald were gonna use a leftover bomb from the excavation site to blow some random shit up. I sighed sadly and heavily. We never got around to it. I stood up quickly and walked up to the cupboard. I pulled out my keys and quickly found the key I'd need. I opened the cupboard with little effort and found the 10 kilos of plastic explosive inside. It had already been set up with a 60-second timer and a remote detonator by a colleague. I sat at the table with the explosive, a vague plan forming in my broken mind. Maybe if I somehow get this wall thing to eat this bomb then. Before I could formulate my thoughts fully, the lights flickered, and the entire facility was plunged into darkness unceremoniously. My nerves were burning with fear. What had happened? Had that thing knocked the power out somehow? The next few seconds that passed were some of the longest I'd ever experienced. However, dim green light bloomed to life, and the reserve power kicked in. Then I heard slow, shuffling footsteps in the corridor just outside the office. I froze once again, my insides turning to mush. My mind raced. Had I remembered to lock the door? My stomach leapt into my feet as I heard the shuffling get louder and louder. I heard hoarse, wheezing breaths, as if the thing struggled to breathe. I jumped from fright, but remained absolutely silent as whatever the thing was banged on the door with a deafening blow. Bang! The door shook and bent slightly. Bang! Silence for a moment. Bang, bang, again silence. My heart was hammering in my ears, and I sat deathly still. I could hear that thing breathing louder. After a few moments, I heard it shuffle away. My entire body was shaking as relief washed over me. Whatever the thing was, it had walked away, and I could no longer hear it. I turned to look at the monitors. Dare I turn them on and check what it was? After a few seconds of consideration, holding my breath, I turned to the monitors and switched them on. So waited in nervous anticipation as the screens flickered to life, showing me that all the corridors between me and the wall were currently empty. I didn't bother checking the corridor I suspected the shambling thing was in. I didn't want to see it unless I needed to. I did just about all the stress and terror I could take, and by this stage I felt weirdly calm. It must be shock. A thin sigh escaped me as I stood. The fear in my blood began to feed a furnace of anger in my heart. I thought about all those who I had lost. I felt my expression turn to granite. It's time to kill this thing. I opened the door slowly, my fully loaded gun in my good hand. Spare ammo along with the explosive and a shotgun was stashed in my backpack, and the remote detonator was tied to my belt. I held a heavy-duty flashlight in my shaky right hand. I moved cautiously through the dark green corridors. I'd never thought of how creepy this place could be until this moment. Gooseflesh crept up my arms and neck as I continued. All I could hear were my soft footfalls and shallow, anxious breaths. I cleared the corridors one by one until I made it to the stairs that would lead me to the thing that looks like a wall. I walked up the stairs slowly, my ears honing in on any sound. That's when I heard it. I heard the soft sound of crying. Someone was crying. I stopped dead in my tracks. My entire body shook from the adrenaline surging through me. I took one step, then another. Slowly I climbed. Once my head could peek over the top, I froze. Jonesy was squatting on his knees, naked. He was between the wall and me, with his back facing me. The terrifying thing loomed enormous before us. It was now framed intricately with the skeletons of hundreds of people, all twisted and screaming in agony. Writhing, tortured souls fused together. Then came the sound of crying and moaning from the wall. I could hear them all. They were all screaming for me to help them, to join them. I felt that pressure squeeze against my skull tighter and tighter. I shook my head in defiance. "No, you bastard! No, I will not join you. You're not Jonesy." All at once the moans and wails stopped. I suddenly found myself at the top of the stairs without knowing when I'd finished climbing them. "But we are Jonesy," came a voice that was not human. It was a voice made from all those it had swallowed up. It was as though something had made a distorted copy of the voices of all those people and then just used them all at once to speak. It didn't understand the concept of individuality. All of a sudden, the wall rippled and gray tendrils squirmed from the flesh of the wall, curling around Jonesy as they teased his face and slowly pulled him in. As he disappeared, there was a horrendous sucking, squelching noise. "We are Jonesy. We are all. We can be all. We will be all and more than all." The voice was chanting this over and over, louder and louder. A deafening blast came from the wall, and a slithering, writhing mass of tangled human limbs emerged. It had 4 legs and several arms. It looked like the bodies of 8 or more people shuffled and glued into an otherworldly horror. Its multiple mouths screamed a high-pitched squeal that was more horrifying than the screams of the damned, and its sharp-pointed teeth gnashed and chomped. I only had a second to dodge this monster. I leapt to the side and fired multiple shots at the thing's center of mass. Its horrifying body of fused torsos wriggled and bled black ichor. It screamed with pain and jumped at me, grabbing my leg. It tossed me into the air, and I almost lost my gun as I slammed into the floor a few feet away. Before I could catch my breath, it was upon me again. From the ground, I fired several shots at it. This made it jump away and scuttle down the stairs. With it momentarily out of sight, I quickly got to my feet and kept my eyes on the stairs. After a second, I decided to kneel and take off my backpack as fast as I could. I pulled out the bomb and started the timer. I also decided to get the shotgun out and get it loaded. I needed to do this now or never. As the final shell clicked into place, I heard a roar coming from the stairs. The thing was back. Before I could react, it leapt at me and knocked me to the ground. The bomb flew from my grasp. It bared down on me, grabbing at my throat, ready to tear me apart. My reflexes saved me though, and I managed to use my shotgun to hold the thing at bay, but it was too strong. Desperate, I kicked it hard in the chest, and it let go. I used this moment to grab the bomb that lay behind me. Only 37 seconds to go. Terrified and crazed, sweat pouring down my face, my mind in pieces, I rammed the bomb into the creature's mouth and kicked it back again as hard as I could. I heard it yelp like a wounded dog, and it lost its footing. It fell sideways, and in that second, I took my shotgun and fired at it in the chest. The force of the close-range blast sent me flying. At the same time, the creature was hurled back into the wall, where it was enveloped quickly. My head was fuzzy. I was dizzy, and the wind had been knocked out of me. Was the bomb going to work? I felt something warm and wet drip into my ear and touch the side of my head. My fingertips came away soaked in blood. My head was spinning. With a foggy mind, I grabbed my bag, collecting my weapons and flashlight. As I stood up, I heard a low rumbling sound. The ground beneath my feet shook, and for a moment I was confused. Then I looked up at the wall. Its surface was roiling and boiling like I'd never seen before. It was shaking and growing. I turned to run when suddenly there was a massive blast from inside it, and the entire wall exploded into hundreds of small gray chunks. These chunks rained down all around the hangar, smashing several aircraft. The blast knocked me off my feet, and this time I definitely passed out because when I awoke I could see daylight through the tiny cracks in the blast door. Where the wall had once been now stood a small blackened crater. I turned around to inspect the wall pieces and found that my eyes grew wide and my mouth opened. They were melting. As I approached a fragment of wall, a horrible twisted hand shot out at me. I yelled and jumped away. It was still alive. I watched in dumbfounded horror as the pieces continued to melt and began to merge, just like that scene from Terminator 2. It was rebuilding itself. Then I heard a groan. My blood became ice. I turned slowly in terror to find the shambling, wheezing monstrosity behind me. Like the creature I'd shot, this one seemed made from bits and pieces of human limbs knitted together randomly. This one had legs which came out its mouth, its head positioned within its torso where the belly button should be, and it wheezed in pain. I almost puked from fright, but my legs were already carrying me away. I sprinted down the corridors, ignoring all the pain and fear and exhaustion and anger and frustration I had inside me. Without thinking, I leapt into the first janitor's closet I found and locked the door with a dull clunking sound. After catching my breath, I found this notepad and pencil and have been writing this report in the sterile glow of my flashlight. Hopefully, I have left some useful information for anyone who may find this. Now I lie in wait for that thing. Now I lie in wait for that gray ooze. What is that thing? Is it truly indestructible? If it can survive a bomb like that, what hope do we have? It's no wall at all. It's a membrane, an interface. Somewhere very different is pressing up against us. It has torn a small hole and was now prying it open further. I should blow up this whole damn place. I should burn it. But would it matter? Or would it just be buried to be rediscovered? I think even if I survive this, nothing can help us. So here I wait, hoping to be saved, but even as I write this, I can hear that thing walking past the door. With a soft click, I turn off my flashlight. I try not to breathe. I can hear the snuffling. It's right outside. I can smell its ugly breath. So God, I hear the jingling of keys. The door is unlocking. How? How? So God, the doorknob is turning. Doorknob is turning. Doorknob is turning. Doorknob is turning. Doorknob